Hey everyone, my name's Kelvin and welcome back to another watercolor tutorial for Procreate. In this video I've decided to go back to basics and do a project where I paint this simple kind of primitive flower illustration like this one. And I think it's a great chance to show you that hard edge technique one more time and also how I can get some sort of realistic water stain effects. So I'm going to start out with a blank Fabriano Mill watercolor paper texture, but you can use any of the paper textures. And I'm going to do most of this with the abstract round brush, and I'll put links to all the materials I use in the description down below. So using the abstract round brush, I'm going to start out with a kind of purple color, desaturated medium kind of purple, and I'm going to do the first row of flower petals, and they're going to be stroke based, so I'm just going to start out very light, and then I'll press harder and then sort of stop at the end. And these are just going to be very sort of weird and random flower petals. There we go. After I've done a few of them, I can shift the hue, maybe choose a slightly different shade, and then add maybe just a couple more random ones in there. And I'll just do another sort of row of petals. And there we go. I'm really happy with this. I'm just going to use the water blender and mix up a few of the hard edges, but I'll make sure to leave plenty behind so there's some definition in the petals. Next, I'm just going to add some color variations, so I'll grab the freehand selection tool and just make a random selection like that. Feather it out, go to hue, saturation, and brightness, and just drop in some warm tones like that. And next, I want to give this a hard edge, and I've covered this process in previous videos, but I'll cover it again here because it's really simple. I'm just going to grab the selection tool, but this time I'll set it to automatic. And then out here in the white area, I'm just going to click and drag until all the white area becomes blue, and I'm just paying close attention to the edges. I don't want to select so far that the blue is going into the flower petals. And in this case, I do have a sort of isolated area, so I'm just going to tap on that, and that'll just include it in the selection. And next, I'm going to go and feather it, but not very much. I'm just going to feather it maybe 4%, just so I can barely see it going over the edge there. Now if I go to hue, saturation, and brightness, I can just darken that edge, and you can see that effect there. And I'm going to saturate it a little bit too. And that's just a simple way to add that sort of subtle, dark, water stain edge. And I want to also add some water stains. And this is a little bit of a different process. I haven't covered this one before, but basically I'm going to look for a very dark area, and I'm going to grab the selection tool, set it back to freehand, and I'm just going to select along the area where I want there to be like a water stain. And I'm not going to feather it. I'm just going to go straight to hue, saturation, and brightness. And I'm going to brighten that up and also desaturate it a little bit. And next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the selection tool one more time. I'm going to try to go sort of close to the edge that I made before, like that, and then back again. But this time you can see there's like a slight gap. There we go. I'm going to feather this one out maybe 10% like that. I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll just darken that area and then raise the saturation. And next I could go in there with the water blender, maybe like that, and just blend this edge, just sort of push it back. And then at a smaller size, I can go in there and kind of scribble it. And this is how I can create a kind of a water stain effect. And I'm going to do the same thing here and here. And there we go. I'm really happy with the way those kind of water stains look. And I'm going to move on and do the stem now. So I'll make a new layer. And this time I'm going to choose a greenish color, kind of a bluish green like that. And I'll do this with the abstract round, but at a smaller size than I did the petals. And I'm going to start by doing kind of like a bulb up here. And then as I go down, I'll sort of use it very lightly and make this kind of spindly stem like that. And for the leaf, I'll use it as a little bit of a larger size. And it's just going to be stroke based, so I'll just press very lightly, and then harder and harder, and just kind of circle back. That's just a simple way to create a very simple leaf. And I'll use the eraser brush. And the end of this turned out to be a little bit too perfect. So I'm going to go in there and just mess it up kind of on purpose. There we go. That looks pretty good. I don't really like this shade of green actually, so I'm going to shift it. So I'm going to go to hue, saturation, and brightness and just shift it a little bit more towards blue. And also, I want to add a color variation to it. So I'm going to use the freehand selection and just randomly select like that. Feather it out, hue, saturation, and brightness, and maybe drop in a little bit more blue. Maybe even make it a little bit darker. And that just makes it a little bit more interesting to look at. Now I want to add a simple shadow up here. So freehand selection tool, at the top of the stem, I'll just cross it off like that. Hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll just darken that area. And now for the stem, I want to do the same thing I did to the flower petals. I want to give it that dark edge. So I'm going to go to my selection tool, set it to automatic, click and drag until everything's blue. You know, if you're seeing that, you've gone too far. So I'm just going to back it up just until it's along the edge there. I'll feather it out a couple of %, hue, saturation, and brightness, and then I'll just darken it and then saturate it a little bit. And now I can merge everything onto one layer. And if I zoom in here, I can use the water blender to blur this edge. And I want to make it look like these were both wet when I painted them, so they're going to interact a lot. So I'm going to try to pull a little bit of the purple into the green, and then a little bit of the green into the purple. And also, while I'm at it, I'm going to soften this edge up just a little bit. And there we go. This is almost done. I'm just going to do one more thing. I'm going to make a new layer and select a really dark purple color. And I'm going to grab the fine liner pen brush. And I'm just going to go in there, maybe at 10%, and just make a bunch of these little different size sort of splatters. And I'm also going to make a few larger ones just by kind of scribbling those on like that. There we go. It just adds something kind of interesting up there in the flower. And I'm going to stand back and look at this and see, you know, are there any areas that look a little bit flat or boring? And I think this leaf could use a little bit of maybe something to kind of set it off a little bit. So I'm going to grab the selection tool, set to freehand, and I'm going to go back to the layer that has the leaf on it. And I'm just going to select, I'm going to make sure I have the selection tool, and I'm just going to select down one part of it like that. I won't feather it. I'm just going to darken it. There we go. And then I'll go to my water blender and just carefully mix up that edge. I'm doing a kind of similar technique that I did with the water stain. Then I'm going to go over it again, but at a much smaller size, and just kind of scribble back and forth just to create those kind of spidery water blending patterns. And then maybe one more time, I'm going to go over it at a larger size. There we go. It just makes that leaf a little bit more interesting. And also up here, you know, it is feeling like it's lacking something, so I'll use the selection tool again and just sort of select randomly in those boring looking petals. I'll feather them out this time, hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll just play with that and see if I can add in something interesting just to make them look a little bit less flat. There we go. I just added some, basically I just lightened it in those areas and desaturated. I think it does add a little bit more of an interesting texture to it. And this one would be done. Let me know what you think of this process. I think for the next few videos, I'm going to try to go back to basics. But if you're looking for a more advanced tutorial, you've probably seen this already, but if you haven't, check out this 3-part series where I sort of go into detail on how I paint this indoor living room scene. And thank you all so much for your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.